A while back, I saw this fucking crazy 4chan thread of Canadians talking about why the conservative leader in Parliament is actually this secret-based groyper who's going to bring about white nationalism in Canada. Never mind the fact that he supports bringing in an additional 1 million immigrants, as well as abortion and the legalization of cannabis. He also supports same-sex marriage in Canada and transgender rights. These things, as well as the fact that his wife is literally brown, should indicate that that guy is not on the side of the people who claim he's on the side of. These very far-right people are not with him, even though they think that he's with them. And it led me to think about a lot of different things. It led me to think about how ideology is not just completely made up, it's also projected onto literally whatever you want. Taking another example from recent history, these protests that are happening in Ireland, or to more accurately call them riots that are happening in Ireland over a brown immigrant man supposedly of Algerian descent stabbing multiple children. There have been riots by far-right provocateurs claiming things like Ireland for the Irish or Irish Lives Matter and so on. General anti-immigrant sentiment seems to be behind the things that they're doing and saying. They've rioted in the streets, they've looted as well. You have leftists seeing the things that these people are doing and penning articles about how these riots are the result of capitalist alienation, and that really we ought to be sympathizing with the workers who are expressing their alienation with the capitalist system in the form of the riot, but they lack class consciousness, and instead that manifests as false consciousness in the form of the anti-immigrant sentiment. This is also something that's being said of our global climate, and it's equally as delusional as those right-wing folks talking about the Tory minister in Canada. It's just as delusional if you cut it both ways. It led me to think about how when you look at perhaps some less radical leftists, not these Marxist types who are attempting to filter everything through this grand narrative of Marxism, at that point you might as well be saying that the rapture is about to come. It made me think about more moderate lefties as well. The people who say, fuck the troops, lol, Americans got rolled in Vietnam, or people just want to join the military because they want to kill brown people. But also, the veterans have PTSD and the government won't support them. Think of the poor veterans. You can sort of see how the contradictions are forming here. Glory to Ukraine. Watch this Russian invader get his legs blown off by a drone he never saw. Get owned, invader. Ignore the swastika insignia on this footage because I'm sure it means nothing. Also, Hiroshima and Nagasaki were completely unjustified. Right-wing religious fundamentalist groups want to kill all immigrants. Glory to Hamas. Does this sound familiar from some of the social democratic, quote-unquote, or progressive voices in the world today? If you've been paying attention to a lot of the discussions online, it probably does. And it makes me think as well about the recent killings across North America, or at least attempted killings in some cases, by Indian nationals who have been hired by the Indian government. People who, for all intents and purposes, you'd think want to impress upon the West this idea that India is a great place to do business, is a great geopolitical ally against China, and so on. You would think that they would be preoccupied with cementing their position in the world, and therefore in provinces that might want to break away or separate, by cementing their global role, by strengthening their economy through their allegiance to the West in their attempt to counter China on the global stage. You would think that would be where their head is at. But no, they hire these people to either actually kill Canadian nationals, in the instance of that one guy in particular, or attempt to kill U.S. nationals. There have been multiple attempts that Indian nationals, having been paid by the Indian government, have made on taking the lives of Sikhs within the US, and in the case of the Canadian example I gave, literally taking the life of one of them. This doesn't make any sense from a logical perspective if you think about the self-interest of the Canadian government. Hell, if you just think about this from the standpoint of a state that wants to suppress its ethnic minority, where there may be some sentiment toward creating a state, a breakaway state that's based on an ethno-religious identity, this of course being the Sikhs. If you wanted to quell that sort of unrest, wouldn't it stand to reason that increasing your place in the world, increasing your share of the global economy, wouldn't it stand to reason that doing that would be the way you go about quelling that unrest in that province? Making the people more economically well off in general? But no, they don't follow this logic. They don't do the logical thing. They do the incomprehensible, fantastical thing. We see this as well in how the government is handling the economy in the UK today. You would think that when Liz Truss was Prime Minister of the UK, that if you believed the narrative that's proposed on the left, that the people in power would just have allegiance to the elites. So when Liz Truss did massive tax breaks that tanked the economy, ostensibly for the elites to have more money, you would think that the elites wouldn't want her out right away. But what happened? The elites wanted her out right away, because even though all of those tax cuts went to the top 1%, they were also disastrous for the economy. And so you look at what's happening with the budgetary measures that come up. They'll simultaneously engage in deficits while arguing against them, so it's not about ideology. They will simultaneously do things that tank the economy, which benefits literally nobody. It doesn't make any sense. And it leads one to believe that these people are just as incompetent as we are. That all of these people who are leading these countries, doing things in the world, they don't have it all figured out. In fact, a lot of them are just as confused as we are. I look at all of this, and I can't help but think that all of them, perhaps all of us, are just living in some kind of dream world. That in our daily lives we occupy a continuous state of fantasy, and that perhaps that's the best we can do. Because if the most intelligent and brightest minds are putting their countries in disarray, and nobody has a coherent explanation as to why, if supposedly these people are oh so intelligent and that's the reason why they deserve to be in these positions of power, but they run them so incompetently as so many of us run our own lives, it makes me wonder if this intelligence thing itself is real. Because when you think about it, what is perception? You look at a thing and your brain attempts to create an approximate model of what that thing in front of you is, but it doesn't have all of the information. All of the information that comprises that thing in front of you is not being viewed, so when we see something, our brain is basically trying to put together its best guess of that thing that we're looking at. And then that's what we end up looking at. When we have conversations with one another, oftentimes I think it devolves into semantics because we're talking in riddles. The riddles are the things, not just the things that we think, but also the things we think about the things that we think. And also, all of these floating signifiers that exist around us, all of the meaning that we've ascribed to each of those individual things, kind of morphing into this system in our mind. And then, when we attempt to articulate what exactly that is, when we attempt to translate that stuff that's floating around in our mind into words that hopefully would be communicated to someone else, the person listening to it now projects all of their baggage, all of their conclusions about each individual word that you're using onto what you're saying. And then both people end up in a state of confusion, talking past one another, or not really talking about anything at all, because it would appear as though they're occupying two different fantasies. That the words that they're using are imbued with such radically different meaning on both sides that in attempt to reconcile those two alternate stances, those two alternate ways of interpreting the words, it's futile. Any attempt to do that is futile because they're occupying such radically different spaces. And I don't mean this in terms of like, okay, this person has I don't know, right-wing ideology, or this person has a left-wing ideology. I mean this in terms of like, what words like left-wing or right-wing ideology even mean in the first place. Because these are such emotionally loaded things for so many people that to even get down, I mean, not even getting that specific, like, you can take simple words, like very simple words, and people could have such radically different perspectives on what they are and what they mean to them. And it could result in a confusing discussion. I don't know. I feel like I'm surrounded by these cryptic and incomprehensible dreams that we're all living in.